So today we've got JP. Thanks, JP, for joining us. JP, before we get into our chat, you've got very deep roots within the beverage space, from Red Bull to Good Drinks, and now my trusted colleague at East Coast. How did that shape your perspective with that experience?
Thanks, Sash. I think I've been fortunate to see the industry from a lot of different angles. So, starting out at Red Bull, I was able to learn about scale and brand power and the consumer pull and push that those brands are able to do. Then at Good Drinks, a smaller business, a different industry in craft beer, and I was able to see what it takes to build a craft brand, not just in your local market, but also across Australia as well. And ending up there as the leader of innovation for 13 brands enabled me to look across some global brands we were distributing while also working across local craft brands as well. So that's given me a much better appreciation for the challenges that face our craft drinks businesses every day. And now at East Coast, we're working with hundreds of those small producers across Australia. I've been able to take all of that brand experience into a supplier side and use that firsthand, knowing some of the pressures on the industry, not just in craft beer, but on total beverage. And I think the best bit is the resilience and the creativity of the people that we're working with every day in that space, while everyone's playing on hard mode, essentially.
You've spoken about hard mode in relation to the Australian brewing scene. Can you unpack that metaphor a little bit for us?
Yeah, sure. It's a reference to gaming. And so you can choose to play games on easy mode or hard mode. Right now, Australian brewers, and in fact, our total Australian drink scene, feels like we're playing on the hardest setting possible. Consumers are reevaluating how much alcohol they're drinking. Retailers are, in some cases, reducing support or being a bit less supportive than they have in the past. Then we've got costs that keep going up, of course. We've got the media not necessarily helping things either. And there are regulations. A couple of years ago, it was pregnancy warning label. Now we're looking at things like Health Star and energy labeling on alcoholic drinks as well. So for our craft drink producers, whether they're alcoholic or not, it really feels like we've turned this game up to the max setting and we're playing on hard mode. And that's forcing everyone to really evaluate their business strategies, and they're having to lean more into that agile and creative bent more than ever just to survive.
In terms of the consumer shift, what are some of the biggest shifts you've seen in the Australian drinking habits, particularly post-COVID?
Yeah, the last couple of years, of course, have been pretty wild. They're certainly, if we throw back 5 years, that was the COVID era. Perspective, everyone was having a bit of fun at home. And as Aussies, when everyone was told you can't go to work or you need to work from home, it basically was a national party. So we certainly saw people's drinking increase during that time of alcoholic beverages. And that Great Australian Party really ensued probably for 2 odd years. Coming out of that, everyone was like, okay, I need to dry out a little bit. And I think what that COVID era did was potentially accelerate some of our trends, particularly in craft beverage, because everyone wanted to support local, support the people who are around the road. So if you were a brewer or distiller, you were really well supported mostly by not just your local foot traffic and your local area, but also the retailers as well, who were really keen to support their local brands because that's what the consumers wanted. But on an alcohol side, we've seen that shift now, and people have certainly reevaluated how much they're drinking. People still want to have fun, but they're looking for that in other places. And we've seen people's habits not just necessarily reduce, but with big campaigns over the last 10 years, like Over Beer from Canadian Club, it's made really permissible things like Canadian Club, but now hard solo for men and women to consume those beverages from an alcohol point of view. Yeah, we've certainly seen some big shifts in the alcohol drinking habits. And because people are drinking less booze but still want to have fun, we've seen a rise in other types of, let's call them functional beverages. They're non-alcoholic by nature, but aren't necessarily branded as a non-alcoholic booze kind of thing.
Younger consumers are definitely turning away from beer and the high volume alcohol. What's driving that shift, do you think?
For younger consumers, they've seen it as bloaty, heavy, unhealthy, maybe even a bit old-fashioned because it's what their dad drinks. And in a world where social media is their world, image really matters. There are some beverages like perhaps spirits or cocktails or ready-to-drinks or things like maybe White Claw, vodka sodas, that kind of thing, maybe even the hard solo low sugars that people think maybe a bit trendier and a bit less old-fashioned. And if your whole world's built around image, so the TikTok and Instagram culture has changed how people drink, and the fact that if you do something stupid, your mates are probably going to record it and put it on the internet is probably changing your desire to drink in excess and potentially drink at all as well.
Yeah, it's definitely the social media generation has definitely changed the landscape for that.
Sash, you've got kids.
Yeah.
You would see that play out every day, right?
Yeah, the next generation coming through, friends that have got high school age kids, they're just not drinking like we did. They've got a little bit more going on. It's very much image-based way of thinking because everything is on the internet. We just didn't have that. We didn't have the phones. We didn't have social media. That just didn't exist. That's their reality. And I think that's the positive outcome for the younger generation. For us, it's still we consume. It might be slightly different. We might look at different alcohol volumes and maybe low ABVs and things like that. So I think that's just a generational thing.
So it might be, I don't know if it's necessarily, maybe our younger generations are physically healthier, perhaps social media. And so maybe people are physically a bit healthier, but socially and mentally, maybe that's the health stuff that requires the attention.
Yeah, and I suppose then that then changes the landscape. And when we're talking about alcohol consumption, then that changes the landscape into those more functional beverages, and you see a real rise in that type of drinking. So they're choosing either a low alcohol or no alcohol option.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask, you describe retailers as saying fridges aren't made of rubber. What does that mean in practice for small brewers?
There's only so much space.
Yeah.
There are over 600 brewers, over 600 distillers in Australia now. And so there are at least 1,200 craft alcohol businesses, all of whom would like their products on those shelves. And a mentor of mine used to say the fridges aren't made of rubber. And that means that you can't just put everything into that fridge and it just stretches and it all fits, right? We've seen over the last couple of years that retailers are rationalizing that range. That means that they're trimming down how many products they're holding, not just at a store level, but within their warehouses and distribution centers as well. So they're holding less products as a number. And within beverage, that potentially means that there are fewer spots available for beverages, craft brewers, craft distillers in those distribution centers, which then means if you're not in the distribution center, then you can't get into the store in some cases. Although you can sell in direct to store if you're a brand that they would like. But still, that space at a store level is really tight. And they're looking, that space in store is really tight. And they're looking for suppliers to help deliver their KPIs as well. They want margin growth. They want new products. They want to be attracting consumers from their competitors and keeping people coming in week on week. So yeah, that fridges aren't made of rubber comment just means that there's only so much space, and the space that is there needs to help them deliver on their goals, and has made life a little bit tough for independents who are trying to break through, or brands who have been there for yonks but who perhaps aren't moving as fast as they used to, and they're facing the chop so that the retailers can allocate that space to something that will help the retailers achieve their goals. And that's not just the big ones. That's every retailer who is wanting to pay their bills and pay their staff.
Yeah, for sure. One question I had around that is the impact of private labels or the kind of faux craft beers from retailers. How do you think that impacts that shelf and independence? What's your take on that?
Yeah, the private label thing has been emerging in Australia for the best part of a decade. We've had private label brands in Australia in the grocery segment for yonks and yonks. I think it really came to people's attention when Aldi launched in Australia and most of their brands were in-house brands. And thanks to Four Corners investigations and various other things in the media, people are a bit more aware of what private label means or faux
Yeah.
craft now. So they, of course, have an impact because if the fridges aren't rubber, but the retailer is putting their own products on their own shelves, there's now even less space available for our independent and our craft drinks producers. And that makes things even more competitive. So those brands often look and feel like the independent brands, but they're owned by the retailer. And because they're not often building marketing plans and contributing to the community, they're not running the full beverage business, they're just creating a product and putting it on their own shelves. They are able to come in at a cheaper price point while still achieving the retailer's margin expectations. And consumers often don't even realize or know the difference. So our independent drinks are losing shelf space to their own retailers and their own supply partners. And then they're potentially losing consumers to brands they think are authentic and local, but in fact are just mimicking what the craft movement is giving to the market.
Yeah, it's interesting. There's the fors and against it, right?
Mm.
As a consumer, if it tastes the same, if it looks a certain way, the way that you want it to look, then sure, take it to the barbecue. But I think for people that really care about what they're drinking, that can be a bit of an issue. But I think people are getting savvy. They're savvier than we give them credit for, and they want to either drink something that's local. Especially, I live in a coastal town. People are proud of their local breweries and wineries here. And when people come in here as well for holidays, which is several times a year, they want to try out the local produce.
And that's the benefit, right? That our independent drinks businesses are building themselves into the fibers of their local communities. And
Have to.
particularly if they've got venues and those sorts of things, pubs have often got this ability to create these central hubs of the whole community that food and drink experiences revolve around. You can celebrate 18th, 21st, 30th, 50th, engagements, weddings, birthdays, footy presentation nights, all of those things. And so that's the experience that our independent brands and our independent businesses are giving to their local communities. You don't get that with private label. You just get a product on a shelf. You don't get investment into communities and experiences and moments. And that's where our
No, yeah, agree. There's no story behind it. People love having a story behind what they're consuming. They've bought something that feels more authentic. And I think that has been a nice shift within consumer appetite as well. They want to see a story behind a brand. I wanted to ask you about the industry health, and when we're looking at growth figures and craft beer dollars versus volume, what story do the numbers really tell from your perspective?
Yeah, the craft beer segment is still only about 10% of Australia's total beer. It's a smaller part of the category, but it punches above its weight. It's delivering more dollar value usually than what it's delivering from a volume perspective. And the numbers last year saw craft delivering about 16% of dollar value versus only 10 or 12% of the volume. So it's punching above its weight. But we've certainly seen over the last particularly 2 years that the media are printing headlines about craft beer is dead or industry on its knees and those sorts of things. I think we work in that space. We're really close to it. And we've certainly seen some people's business models that were really big into the wholesale and selling into retail shift back to creating amazing, wonderful community experiences within their venue. And on that higher margin revenue where they can as well. But for some people, they haven't been able to do that because they've built the farm on wholesale volume that now doesn't exist anymore, or is much, much lower than what it was. That's why we've seen voluntary administrations and stuff within the craft beer industry, because certain segments of people's revenue have just been almost, the tap's been turned completely off. And so they've built their cost bases and their businesses on revenues, multiple different revenue streams. And if one of those turns off, now you do have to restructure the business and potentially get the administrators in. I wouldn't say that we're seeing the growth that we've seen in craft beer over the last 10 or 20 years. And I mentioned that COVID, I think perhaps because everyone was sat at home drinking craft drinks, beers, wines, spirits for 2 years, that consumption just skyrocketed, right? And then when we finished that, everyone said, okay, I'm done with my craft booze for a minute. I need to go for a run or get involved in my local F45 or something. So it potentially artificially and quicker than what we were expecting maybe matured parts of that industry, because we packed 5 years of consumption into 2, and then that market maturity hit, plus the whole business environment that has ensued over the last couple of years as well. And even though we're starting to ease interest rates and stuff like that, the amount that prices are rising and the pressure that are on families and households right now, those interest rate reductions that we're getting aren't necessarily enough to create enough headroom and disposable income in family and household budgets for people to go back to their old craft habits.
Oh, that would be nice though, wouldn't it?
It would be nice.
I think it would be nice. I think that we're starting to see the pressure come off. Like, definitely it's just going to be slower than what maybe people initially thought. I think that it leads me into thinking that brewers or beverage makers that are building communities and brands based on the stories that they tell and the communities that they build, it couldn't be more important, because if you're relying on retailers, then you're doing yourself a disservice. Build that brand up yourself, build those stories. I look at, from a larger scale, Hard Fizz and the community that they have built, and Dangerous. It's a smaller brewery based here, very community driven, has a good place within the community and does all the things that you suggested earlier. So there's scales of storytelling, brand building, but you see how community can really drive that, whether it's online or in person.
I think the most important headline here is that just because the media are saying that certain industries are challenged and stuff like that, doesn't mean that every single business and every single business model within that industry is also cooked. That's absolutely not the story. No. Sash, you and I, who we work with at East Coast, have the benefit of seeing some awesome stories of people who have reshaped their businesses and their business models to be in a really healthy position at the moment. And it is those businesses that have been part of their own communities for multiple years, that have built multiple different revenue streams, that are investing in their people, their plans, their marketing, their brands. They're not just sitting on their laurels hoping that people are going to walk through the door, or that people are just going to consume their products like they used to. So those who are going to even more effort now as it gets harder and potentially over-investing in their community, you and I are seeing they're having phenomenal success. So if there's something that anyone takes out of what we're talking about today, there are brands and businesses and business models and business strategies that are really performing in this market. And we've been lucky enough to see some of our customers make those moves and benefit from it.
100%. Like, we're seeing it all over the place, and it's about being sharp on the tool and making sure you know exactly what you want to do and understand who you are as a business and a brand, for sure. While we're on the money subject, I wanted to talk to you about some of the regulations and policies we have in Australia. As we all know, Australia's the third highest alcohol excise in the world. How does that compare internationally, and what does that mean for small brewers?
We have to credit our Independent Brewers Association in Australia for a huge campaign in being able to get some time with Parliament and with government to get this message through. Our alcohol excise is indexed to inflation. It was rising twice a year until during the last federal election, the Prime Minister said, all right, we're going to just pause that for 2 years and we're going to freeze it. We've got to give some credit to our Independent Brewers Association and our Independent Distillers Association for the amount of work that they put in with the government to saying we've got over 1,200 small businesses in Australia. We employ tens of thousands of people, and twice a year, you just keep ratcheting up the pressure on these small businesses who are delivering something that Aussies love, which is a drink in an amazing community venue. So credit where credit's due. Our Independent Brewers Association and our Independent Distillers Association have made big steps, and they've been able to get the government to put a pause on those increases for 2 years. However, at the end of 2 years, what happens and does the problem come back? It's a really challenging place for the government to be in because they rely on it for spending within their budget. It's income for them. And yeah, I think all eyes are on what sort of happens at the end of those 2 years. But for now, thankfully, thanks to the work of our industry groups and their efforts with governments, we've got a minute to take a breather. And hopefully businesses are using that minute to assess, okay, if excise does start increasing again on the other side, how are we best placed to be able to perhaps work that into our businesses and stuff like that? But it's not easy by any means. You just know it's coming.
Even with some of the regulations as well, we're talking mandatory labelling, pregnancy warning, possible health star ratings. How are small producers coping with that kind of thing as well when they've got, thankfully we've got a pause, but then you put those things on top of it?
We talk about the can being such a brand asset and about packaging being such a brand asset. And the more that we take up the real estate on that beautiful brand asset with things like health star ratings and nutritional information panels and stuff like that, it impacts how much of a brand experience you can deliver. It's small in context, but there's cost associated with all of these changes. And we have people who are wearing multiple hats in their businesses. They're the marketing, they're the sales, they're probably head of production, they're the CEO, the GM, the CFO, the CMO, the COO,
the delivery guy,
the delivery person. That's exactly right. If Jeff calls in sick, they're in making pizzas. And all of these things like new mandatory labeling guidelines that seem to change at the moment every 2 years are just another thing for these small business owners who are employing Aussies that they have to worry about. And now they have to be compliant. And now they've got packaging potentially that isn't compliant. That has to go in the bin. There's a cost associated with that environmentally and financially. So we saw this happen with the pregnancy warning labeling. That's happened. That's now in the past. But nutritional panels, health star ratings, energy labeling, and those sorts of things, plus the changes to barcodes as well. Let's not forget that we're going to be moving to QR code barcodes as well. It's a huge amount of stuff that these small business owners probably think, maybe rightly, doesn't contribute to them selling more product, doesn't contribute to them being better business managers, and doesn't increase the health of their business when that's what they're looking for, especially right now. So it feels like more things and more barriers just getting in their way of running great businesses.
With all the pressure, like, how do you think brewers are adapting? What are some of the survival strategies you've seen work under these kind of pressures? We're talking regulations, policies. What's the
There's no silver bullet, but you and I know love this example of Jeff and the team at Seeker, who took an insight around their 500 ml beers not selling as well as they used to. And they said, okay, what's wrong here? Oh, a 500 ml beer, let's say $15 a can. People are finding that pretty challenging as a single unit. Right?
hard on the
It's
pocket?
hard on the pocket. So they've looked across their range and said, okay, we're not going to stop producing limited release beers, but let's look at what our format is. And so they moved their 500s into the 250 ml. They do a multi-buy where you can mix and match different 250 ml limited releases within their tap room and some of their partner retailers. And that is just a beautiful product-led, well thought out way to continue doing what you do well, which is brew great beers and continue to give the local community some new news and different new things to taste based on seasonality and trends. But that you recognize the format you used to put them in yesterday isn't the right format to put them in tomorrow. So they're not rusted on and potentially dying on the hill of what they knew used to work. They're really open to changing and reevaluating and evolving what they do at a product level, because that's where the revenue comes from. And I think that's just a sweet example that you and I have seen firsthand from those guys. That is a way that they're moving with the times.
That could not be a more perfect example. I know that was in conversation with ourselves and working out what formats work. And they didn't want to stop brewing these great new drops, but they wanted to continue to deliver new brews. But it was about how do we get them into the hands, and the flights were the way to go. And it was about putting them into those squats. They obviously still have their core range and other formats within the fridge. Great example of just moving with the times, essentially, and listening to their consumer, because those 500s, it's a share drink sometimes for some people. That's when we talk about wine. We've talked about this in wine, the changes that people are making within not popping that bottle and doing that thing. So it's almost in that same vein.
Yeah, portion control is a topic everywhere.
Yeah.
People are not necessarily wanting to open a whole bottle and that sort of thing, because once it's open, potentially they think or they know that they'll drink the whole bottle. So people are relying on the brands that they shop to give them opportunities to prevent themselves from overindulging. It's why I buy a small bar of chocky, because I know if I buy the full Cadbury glass and a half, I'm going to eat that because I love chocky, right?
100%.
From a dessert point of view, I know that I'm going to go and just get small little treats and small little desserts. And for some people, alcohol is a treat for them, and they want a small format of that because they know if they open the whole bottle or they buy a whole 6-pack, that they love it so much, it'll be gone in a night.
Yeah. Oh, for sure. Definitely. And it's just, again, it circles back to our conversation around the changes in consumption and different generations drinking differently and people being more health conscious. Tell us about East Coast Canning and Printing.
At East Coast, we started as a mobile canning operator, and that meant that small brewers at the time didn't need to invest in hundreds of thousands worth of dollars for their own equipment. And at the heart of the East Coast business, we are still a mobile canning operator. We work with brewers, distillers, winemakers, and coffee roasters to allow them to package their goods on their own site. And that enables them to tap into packaged goods revenue streams and those sorts of things in their tap rooms, their barrel rooms, their distillery doors, and those sorts of things. And some of them are then using them to go into events, or they're going into retail, or they're going into local festivals and those sorts of things. So when we were able to add digitally printed cans into that mix as well, we can now do the tiny runs, we can do the fast turnarounds without labels and without shrink sleeves. And so we can help them launch products without the massive upfront costs. We can do it in a really agile way. And ideally, we're helping them access revenue that they wouldn't have had access to before at much, much lower or no CapEx costs as well.
Looking ahead, how would you advise breweries in 2025? What would you tell them to get it done right from day one?
What a question.
Big question. It's a big one because I suppose like we're looking ahead, we're saying from today, how would you advise a brewer? I've come in, got my recipe, I've gone through the flavor house, I've done all the things but from day one, how would you advise them to get it right? I think it's such a tricky thing to do. There's lots of hoops to jump through. We've talked about those, but from your perspective, your deep experience within the industry, what's your kind of takeaway for those guys?
It's $1 million question, but I think it comes down to three things. I think you've got to build around a tap room. If I was advising a new brewery or distillery this year, I think there's three things that I would mention to them that would be really important. Number one, building your business and your brand around your hospitality concept. Then don't over rely on wholesale revenue. It is a challenging stream to chase right now, but you can certainly drive packaged goods revenue out of things like events, festivals, sports teams, and your own takeaways. And then stay agile, assess what's working and what's not working for your community as you go, and then delete what's not flying. And just, I think remembering that the playbook isn't always set now. So change and iterate as you go if something's not working, and kill it early when you get that gut feel that this isn't right.
What do you see the greatest opportunities for brewers to win, I suppose, in this hard mode environment?
There are a couple of places I think that our small artisanal brands can win despite this hard mode environment. There are some really good direct to consumer kind of dabbles going on across the industry around receiving exclusive products or mixed packs and merchandise, limited releases and those sorts of things direct to your home and them from the venue as well. It's a nice accessory to hospitality. And if not direct to consumer through an e-com means, think about how every person who comes in and buys a drink or has a food or pays the table bill, what we might be able to upsell them in that moment. And of course, from an East Coast point of view, if we've been able to create some packaged goods for you, are we asking every single person that pays the bill, would you like to take a 4-pack with you? That sort of thing. Your procurement agility is going to be really important as well. We are chatting with more and more folks who are bringing their core range can printing over to East Coast because we do have volume benefits. People see, the casual price list for shopping with us one time, but for folks who want to bring their whole core range and their limited release volume to us on an annual basis, there are ways to sharpen the pencil there. And so that gives you just in time procurement, but also gives you better pricing than our casual pricing as well. And thirdly, I think those brands and businesses who are looking at new categories and category blurring, and there's lots of things in a lemon space right now, lots of things in a citrus space, lots of hard sodas, hard soft drinks going down that line, and grabbing some trends out of other parts of the world as well. I'm waiting to see if crosses over into alcohol. So that's that, continuing to have some fun with your range, because that's ultimately what most craft brewers and distillers and craft business owners have got into the game for, because they want to have some fun with range and not be constrained by their employers or other people. Continue to do that, especially if you've got a hospitality venue where you can push that stuff through.
Yeah, I love that. And I think MPD all day. There's always room for it for sure. And you've talked about kind of lessons that we can learn from across the ditch or anywhere else. But what are some of the lessons from the Australian market that maybe are useful to brewers listening from further away potentially? What do you think we have that maybe
Mm.
some of our international counterparts don't have? What do you think that we are, our positive is?
I was lucky enough to attend Brew Asia last year, and I was able to get a sense from the folks I met over there and the people that I chatted to over those couple of days that their market's in a really different space. The craft brewing, craft distilling market is regulated very differently between each of the Asian countries and are much, much earlier in their market growth phase.
Okay.
So I think when I was chatting to them, similar things that we've talked about today around building around hospitality, be conscious of how much the retail revenue is of reliance to your business if that's not something in your market or your regulatory environment can deliver for you at the moment. And to remember, if they're in different stages of their life cycle, different that you can't necessarily transplant trends out of other more advanced markets straight into a more developing market, because there's got to be a ramp and a runway to take people on that journey.
Yeah.
And in craft beer, for example, Australia and the US have had that runway. But if you just grab stuff that's popular in Australia or the US right now and try and transplant that into a market that is still a fledgling craft market in brewing or distilling, that it may not necessarily have a guaranteed success rate because you haven't had that consumer education that you get on the runway or the ramp to get there.
Yeah, for sure. If people wanted to keep the conversation going with you or ourselves, where's the best place for them to connect with you?
So you can find East Coast
Yep.
Canning and Printing on Instagram, Facebook, and LinkedIn. If you're looking for me personally, you can find me on LinkedIn. Sash might tag me in some of these posts. Otherwise, just look up James Purcell on LinkedIn and feel free to DM me there. Otherwise, you can always call or email East Coast, and I'd love to have a chat with you.